Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Isabella and I'm a Senior Program Associate at the Wilson Center's Kennan Institute. Thank you all for joining us today for our conversation, Women's Memory of the Gulag and the Future of Russia's Memorial. We're grateful to once again be offering programming to commemorate the return of the names traditionally held in Russia each year on October 29th to honor victims of Soviet political repressions. In 2021, as in 2020, this important event was moved online due to lockdown measures in most of Russia as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. And we're going to discuss what this event looked like today, this year, and what we may look forward to going forward. Before I move forward to introduce our speakers, a technical note: today's event will be conducted in English and in Russian. We will be offering simultaneous interpretation for today's event. If you need interpretation, please take a look at your Zoom menu bar. You should see a globe there that will allow you to select the language that you need. If you need English, select the English channel, and if you need Russian, select the Russian channel to hear the relevant interpretation. A reminder that you can stay up to date with our work through our Russia File and Focus Ukraine blogs, and on our podcasts, Kennan X and the Russia File podcast. If you have questions today, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom rather than raising your hand. We will be monitoring the Q&A throughout the event and we'll move to your questions following the presentations. Again, if you need interpretation, please select the globe and the language you'll need on the Zoom toolbar. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Irina Sherbakova, who will begin our panel today. Irina is a historian, philologist, and director of the Oral History Center at Memorial. She studied German philology at Moscow State University and holds a PhD in philology. For 15 years, Dr. Sherbakova was a senior methodologist at the Center for Oral History and Visual Anthropology at the Russian State University for the Humanities. Started in 1999, she has been the coordinator of the annual Russian history competition for high school students run by Memorial Society and director of the Oral History Center at Memorial. In 2008, Dr. Sherbakova was a guest professor at the University of Bremen and the University of Jena in Germany. She has published articles in the Russian and international media on the history of the Gulag, women in the Gulag, totalitarianism, and the problems of memory. She holds a number of prestigious awards. Irina, please, the floor is yours.
Меня слышно?
Can you hear me? Everything's okay? I hope. Thank you very much. I'm so sorry. I'm going to be speaking Russian, but thank you very much to our wonderful interpreters. I do hope that they will interpret me well and that you understand everything I'm saying. So thank you very much to the Canon Institute and to Isabella, to Nina, that you invited us here to talk about our exhibition, about our work, about the work of international, about the exhibition, about the work of International Memorial. And we showed you just a little trailer here that of course it's very difficult to understand what the exhibition looks like that was just open, because that was an excuse for our talk today here. It was a reason. The exhibition is called Material, as you've probably noticed. So the female memories of Gulag. Women's memories of Gulag. And why did we pick this, talking about the memory of from women's memoirs? And it is so because if we remember, if we recall, it may be, of course, amongst you there are people that probably know this subject, familiar with it. Then is there a monograph or a paper that would be on women in Gulag? Still, in Russian, there isn't any. There are various publications, yes, and of course there is a big piece on women. Solzhenitsyn had it in Gulag Archipelago, and there is Applebaum. She had that in her book on women, and that, of course, there are various monographs on German women in Gulag, but there's a general the research on women in Gulag in Russia. It doesn't exist. If you look at in Wikipedia, if you look women in Gulag in Russian, then you say there is no page on that, and that is not by accident, and that is to do with the fact that our common history, because if we recall, Bolsheviks came to power, one of the slogans was the equality of women and men, and that played a huge role for the support of women, and that women supported this new order and this program that communists suggested, because really it was very quickly, it was beyond comparison with other European countries. After the revolution, there were equal rights for women, and they could vote, and they got the right to vote, and the procedure for divorce and marriage, and there was it was made all very easy, and that all the other rights to study and for the education and the abortions, and that was just for 20 years after that, and then that was this equality in labor. In the hardest jobs were available for women. That was the equality, not just social equality. It was equality in this awful machine of terror. Everybody was equal too, and it touched upon women too. It involved women, and we can talk about different categories of women that became victims of this terror, and amongst 12 millions of victims of political repressions, quite a percentage were women. But nevertheless, still until now, our calculations, the demographics of the Gulag is very complicated. It's difficult because women, they are not taken separate, they are not delineated into separate category. So there was there was a huge amount of documents which were on all this Gulag machine that is kept in our state archives. The women there, we are getting ready for this exhibition. We try to get together the documents, and what we've clearly saw there, we got convinced that the number of these documents is not that big, that women are not described separately at hardly ever. And you can look at the statistics. Yeah, you can imagine if we look at the women who suffer the so-called the political articles of the criminal code, then about 500,000 women. And we do know that in different periods, for example, during the war, amongst 1.8 million of prisoners of Gulag, more than 20% were women, and they were used the heavy labor hard labor to equal women, and that is not very well documented. And a woman emerges here, and it is not by accident, because this equality is manifested in this relationship, this attitude to the woman is somebody who has no gender, and the female gender arises there in this Gulag system only when you're talking about children being born. That is first and foremost, that is when a woman emerges as a separate unit. That is, if we talk about it, documentation, and all our memories, all our recollection of women, that is based on memoirs. And as we know, memoirs play a huge role in history of Gulag and in history of our political repressions, because we have no visual, we have no video, we have no photographs that would give us the taste of the atmosphere, proper atmosphere of the camps. And we have, of course, we have no cinematic record of it. There are staged, of course, quite early in the beginning of the 30s probably, and then we have very few. We don't have the locations. Our camps, they were all demolished, and they did not remain as museums. So we are looking for them, and we find some places where maybe they could be kind of marked as a topography of terror, but we cannot show anything. And when Memorial emerged, of course, that was 30 years ago, and the key goal that we had was we understood that we encountered this silence, this total blind spot, this visual silence, and so we tried to preserve what we could preserve. And 30 years ago, our collection started being gathered, started emerging, compared to millions of victims, hundreds of these items that we've managed to preserve, that we managed to obtain, that were passed on to us, and that is just a drop in an ocean. And every one of them is totally unique. And of course, we wanted to tell you about the fate of women. That we looked at our collection, and what we've noticed, as I said, that of course, for the most part, that people in Gulag were men, but among those who survived, among those who left memoirs of Gulag, amongst those who preserved certain items, there's quite a lot of women. And our collection actually was built by female hands, and that is not an accident. Of course, we decided that we don't have the capacity, we don't have the energy to build exhibition that would tell about the fight of women in Gulag, because there was a lot of different categories in different periods of time, people being imprisoned in Gulag, and women who were the parties who were persecuted by Bolsheviks, and then the party opposition females, national operations, big terror, and women, wives of so-called enemies of people, women, of course, a lot of women who were just petty crimes, which were repressive, like, for example, small theft, like some blades of a grass of wheat or a loaf of bread somewhere for collaboration during the war. So there was this huge palette, a huge multifaceted, multicolored selection of women, and now so we couldn't reflect it all. So we tried to show the female fight in Gulag through our collection. And when we looked at our collection, what we noticed was that the majority of items involving women that kept by women, they were pieces made of fabric, textile. And then we could understand why, because first of all, for women, something that is close to your body is very important, and because this is something, this is a kind of protection against this kind of horrible world. And so this is why some women, they preserved what was we have these unique things, what they were wearing at the time, what they wore at the time in the camp. And moreover, also very typical for women, that is most varied items that they made themselves, like a psychotherapy kind of thing. And that started in the prison. And all these things, these little things, large things that they were making in order to, for example, to send home to their children little toys or little napkins. This is something that could not be preserved, something that could be taken in your things, something that you can carry on you from one camp to another. You could upkeep it when through the searches, because photographs were burned, other solid things, hard things were taken off them. But if you have a little cloth and maybe something written on it, and that was possible to keep on your body. And then when we looked at this collection, that with this fabric, this material, this image, that is this highly symbolic, as we understand it, and that gives the opportunity to tell you through the material, through our collection, the a woman's fight, the fight of a woman. And it's you could see some things in this. What is a woman's fight? What are the components of it? And of course, it starts with photos. As you get into our exhibition, there's photos of women who, at the moment when just before they were arrested, and when you leave the exhibition, you can have a look at the same women, what they looked like after their arrest and after the years they've spent in Gulag. And all the sections of the exhibition, of course, they are called the way it was dictated through the image of this material, the fabric. So first is called akat, and so that is the moment when the previous life is cut off, and it is cut off literally. The previous life is cut off when you're imprisoned. So all the laces, the strings, everything's cut off. That even if what holds the woman's clothes on, everything's cut off, and it becomes unprotected and humiliated creature. And this wonderful object that we have, and it became a symbol of this exhibition. And that you could see it. This is the architect and graphic artist and the painters. They're going to tell them a little bit about them later to understand this image. But this is the dress that used to belong to a woman who was the art historian, who worked for the Tretyakov Gallery, the famous museum. In 1937, her husband was arrested, and she was arrested herself later as a member of the family of a traitor. And she wore this dress that is a summer dress. She was arrested in the summer, so that was the only thing that all 13 months of the prison she was in that dress, and she was let go from the prison. But she was an art historian, and this natural desire to cut everything off and to cut this past off and throw it away, it's horrible, the dirt and the the stench and the torture, and there was 40 patches on this dress that she did with a piece of a match or fish bone, because you couldn't get needles. You couldn't get needles when you were in prison. So this is the image of this dress, of this patched up, this cut of the previous life, and she kept for many, many years. And this exhibition, in this exhibition, as well as this really awful objects, there's these camp dresses, there are dresses with a camp number, and there are these certainly sizeless, horrible footwear, because there were no special appropriate size women footwear, because there was no footwear for women for to fit women. And but then later, what happens, you can see later. So what we could talk about the material, many female camps, they were tied to embroidery and sewing workshops, and of course it was easier than working in -40 Celsius in the north or in Kalama. And but that was a very, very hard labor, 12, 14 hours a day. That was really stuffy workshops, really not enough light, and we just had to have a look at what wonderful things were made in these workshops, in these factory floors. Fantastic embroideries that they've preserved. But we have to say that in these, it's not the only thing that they made. Also, they did, for example, the soldiers' coats, trench coats from the war that were shot through. They were resewn and restitched. So this production was quite horrible. But there were various things that are confirming their memoirs, because we did have texts, and of course it's the textual memory that we use always in this text of female memoirs and quotations that we have in the sections of our exhibition. They are the basis. The base of the meaning that augments and adds and talks about the items exhibited, and practically every one of them there is a tragic female fate and tragic biography of a woman. And what also can be revealed here, what we can see from the memoirs, the female solidarity and support in the Gulag, that was much stronger among women than men. We don't want to idealize this camp world, and it is really horrible, and it was this horror was described. And to analyze the causes, that is possible, and to explain why it was the way it was, and various things, like mother's instinct had worked, some of them, because in many women they had the children, and the children, they were taken away from them. They couldn't see their children while incarcerated. So this need of support, of love, women had it in spades. And our exhibition actually demonstrates that from nothing, from very little, from this really minute little bags or little pouches, little things which were made just to give something to somebody, to make the little, to give this little joy in this life, to remind of something. And you had to spend a lot of effort doing that after the hard day's work. And this is illustrated by our exhibition. Some of them are really tragic, and this one is really tragic section of the exhibition. This is probably the difficult, from women who were in Gulag. That was a connection to the children, and this is why when there was no hope of seeing them even after, there was no chance of finding a child which were in orphanages somewhere, or died during the war, or the child died in the children's home in the camp, and then probably to do something with her hands, to embroider something, a little a little cap or a little, maybe a little shirt, never hoping to actually maybe even not. So this section is called the threads. And to just it's just a thread from one point to have a thread to pull it somewhere where you will never make it yourself, and how we manage to show it. We don't, it's very difficult to question always how whether we manage to show it or not. There is always this horrible topics that's always this is violence, humiliation, awful day-to-day life. And then in text, in many texts, you often and in stories and tales you can encounter, but women it's very difficult to talk about torture, but violence. Sometimes it's women often just quiet about it. They don't talk. There are texts and there is a book made of this text that you have to really get into, and then you have to read it, and then all the texts they are not uh, hung up. They're just lying there, printed up on the old typewriters, and they were given to us by various people, and then that is the typewriters that were used for some Isdat books, for other texts about Gulag. And so probably there would some historians, they'll probably curse us to say this is too artistic, and we of course we understand that our well, this is historian and artistic, and so we create the image of a woman in Gulag with kind of brush stroke, and this of this female fight in Gulag. And for us, it's very important for this exhibition to be a performance when it was created, when it was built. Architects, Kirill As and Nadia Korbut, that was in memoriam of their grandmother who went through Gulag. And you, as you saw, this is a wall which cuts across the entire room. It's really a horrible wall, and it's huge, and it was it's like 3.5 tons this wall weighs, and it has this little, very little, tiny objects on this wall, and this text. Our young people, employees of Memorial, they never typed on a typewriter, and they came to this world and they always worked on the computer. And here they came and they started writing this on these typewriters, typing this text, and the students of art colleges where our authors teach, authors of this and these wonderful graphic artists. Natalia Tropitsina, who did this placard and this poster, and her students came and they were scratching these quotes from the women's texts, and that turned out to be really hard work. It's like they would read it and they would paint it over and then they rub it off and then they do it again, and this was common united work on this memory. And of course we have this separate room that has this light in it. It's all white, totally white, in contrast to this really dark exhibition where there is you can listen to stories, to tales which were recorded by us in different years, women who survived Gulag, very, very different fates, and we tried to present different ethnicities, and you can sit in this room and listen to these stories. And also there's they're totally unique. The one last thing that I wanted to say, that is totally unique, fantastic objects which bear witness to a amazing strength of the spirit. With the students that we I had just a couple of days ago, and one of them was leaving there, coming out of there. And said, I was thinking. She said, I don't know, would I be able to? Kept thinking about it, and because there are these things, for example, like. You couldn't have gospel, you couldn't have a prayer book, you can't have. So there were icons embroidered, the small ones hidden. There were little books of poetry which were quietly written, and they were probably stitched on a piece of cloth or wrapped in cloth. And we have this little bit, this little cotton jacket, parka, which all the lining is all the covered in writing with prayers, and who the author was and who did it, we don't know. But this is the representation of strength of the spirit, regardless of anything. That is for us. It seemed to us that looking at these things, at these items, that was the sense of the kind of sense that you have. So we do know that there's plenty of arguments about this exhibition, that people come and people ask question why this is so and not so, and I think it's very important. It will be open for a year. Probably we'll live long enough that people who come to Moscow can come and look at this exhibition. Thank you very much.
So much for this discussion. As you were talking, I was thinking I had the honor and the pleasure of visiting Memorial a few years ago, and I remember that jacket with psalms written on the inside. I remember it left such an incredible impression on me. Thank you so much for this story. Next, I would like to invite Steve Barnes. And let me introduce Steve just a second. So Steve is Associate Professor of Russian and European History at George Mason University. He specializes on the history of the Gulag in his research. He completed his first book while a Title VIII scholar at the Kennan Institute. It was the multi-award winning Death and Redemption, the Gulag and the Shaping of Soviet Society. Dr. Barnes is currently completing a book that will be called Gulag Wives, Women, Family, and Survival in Stalin's Terror, that will trace women's lives in a Gulag camp for women arrested solely due to the arrest of their husbands at the height of Stalin's Great Terror. Dr. Barnes teaches extensively on the history of Russia and the Soviet Union, along with global comparative histories of the concentration camp and totalitarianism. Steve, please, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Isabella. Thank you to the Kennan for organizing this really important discussion. Thank you especially to Irina Sherbakova and to Memorial for creating this really important exhibit. I only wish that I was in Moscow so I could actually see it. So I was able to look at photographs that you've put on the website, and it looks absolutely amazing. And so I'll just, I think, put a little bit the exhibit and your work into context as an academic historian of the Gulag. The memorial organization has been incredibly important for so long for our knowledge of the history of the Gulag for over 30 years now, as a collector of memoirs, as a collector of interviews with survivors and family members, as a collector of artwork and of artifacts. And I think the work of Memorial always has first and foremost called our attention to the experience of those who lived through this, to the experience of the survivors, and to the experience, of course, of the victims who did not survive the camps. In fact, the work of Memorial has always inspired us to think about how much life there was in this place of mass death. In fact, my own interest in studying the Gulag came about 25 years ago now when I was in graduate school. And I found this exhibit catalog, if it shows up here well enough. So there was an exhibit in Moscow in 1990 of Gulag art that Memorial put together. And when I found that catalog in the library, it spoke to me so much about how people went to extreme lengths to maintain life, to create art while in the camps. And that started me on now nearly 25 years of wanting to understand these lives more and to understand how people experienced this place. So Memorial is important in my own origin story of how I became interested in writing about the Gulag. But Memorial has always been important as an interpreter of the history of the Gulag. Important especially, I think, for drawing explicit and very important ties between historical questions of political repression and contemporary human rights issues in Russia. But also for academic historians like myself, Memorial has always challenged us to look at and to think about the Gulag in new ways and to address things that we haven't addressed before or that we haven't addressed enough in enough depth and with enough complexity. And so here I point to two aspects actually of this exhibit that I think are so important to us. One is this question of the material culture of the Gulag, and the other, of course, on the history of women's experiences in the Gulag. Neither of these topics have been focused on in the kind of sustained and directed way in academic studies of the Gulag, not to the extent that they should be. It's difficult, in fact, to find a great deal of serious academic study of material culture in the camps. Although it comes up in virtually everybody's books and thinking about things like the shortages of material goods, the shortages of food, the lack of clothing that was appropriate for the temperatures that prisoners were working in, these kinds of things. But this exhibit shows us how important the material good was in the camps, sometimes for aesthetic or for spiritual purposes, as much as it was for utilitarian purposes. And here I think, so the book that I'm writing right now, and I was working with Memorial's archives a number of years ago, collecting material. So I'm writing on a camp in Kazakhstan called Alger. It is an acronym in the Russian for the Akhmelinsk camp for wives of traitors to the motherland. And these were women who were arrested in the midst of the terror merely for the fact that their husbands had been arrested. And in the memoirs of these women, many of which are in Memorial's collections and nowhere else, we find, for example, descriptions of an exhibit of embroidered goods put on by the prisoners themselves in the camp in 1938. What an amazing fact to learn about what life was like in this camp and to learn how important these material goods were to these women. So this question of material culture, I think, is a really important one and one that we haven't thought about enough. And perhaps even more surprising, there have been relatively few, not zero, but relatively few academic studies that focus extensively on the real lived experience of women in the Gulag. Even though they made up, even if we look at official statistics, somewhere between 10% and as much as a quarter of the camp population at different moments in time in the Stalin era. And despite the fact that some of the most well-known memoirists of the Gulag, for example, Yevgenia Ginsburg, were themselves women. But all too often in academic work, and I would say this actually about my own first book, written about primarily a camp called Gulag that had a very large number of women in it. And all too often women's experiences, they make up a chapter, as they do in Anne Applebaum's book, for example, or they make up sections of a chapter. They're small portions of work. And it simply doesn't allow for the kind of extended study of the variety of women's experiences in the Gulag that I think we really need to try to understand this subject. All too often, I would say women's experiences are reduced to either that of solely victim, that is, they play a role in a manuscript often simply as a way to emphasize how evil the Soviet regime was. So if it could do this to women, it is all the more evil than if they had just done it to men. And it plays this kind of instrumental role in those works. Or women are sometimes reduced to the category of saint. They are presented as if they live these absolutely perfect, completely moral lives. They are the exemplar of the nation and of national purity. But not all of this actually, I think, does violence to women's actual experiences. They were people. They experienced this in a whole variety of ways. They weren't all always morally upright because of the experience that they went through. And we need to take that on as historians to try to understand this. We have to understand some nuance about how they actually lived their lives. None of this, by the way, and here I'm especially focusing on academic historians. It's not to miss there are some really important works that have been done. Historians, Anfisa Kukushkina wrote a book on Alger, this camp that I've been focusing on. Meinhard Stark, Oksana Kish, I know is here with us in the audience today, has written a really important book on Ukrainian women in the camps. Catherine Jolik has written on Polish women's experiences. So it's not to deny that there is important work that has been done. It's simply to point out how important it is that Arena and Memorial are pointing us to say, take this subject really seriously and try to understand it and make sense of it. And in fact, I think, we find really in the realm of public history, and I'll finish with this, in the realm of public history, in the realm of museum practice, in the realm of presenting the Gulag through exhibits and through documentary films and dramatic films, we can find much more about both women in the Gulag and about the importance of material culture. Whether we think about the Alger Museum, which there's a museum on the site of this camp that I've been writing about in Kazakhstan. It is devoted there to this group of women, a tremendous amount of information about their experiences. If we think about the way that museums use material culture, use material items to provide a real feel of the Gulag to its visitors, I think these can really show the way for academic historians like myself. Whether we think about the 2019 Russian television serial on Alger, or we think about discussions of a book like Zuleika Opens Her Eyes, we can find more attention, I think, to these subjects often outside of the academic realm than we have found thus far within it. And I think that really challenges those of us who study the Gulag to take the subject seriously. And this exhibit, the work of Memorial, the work of Irina Sherbakova show us something of what we can do when we take these subjects seriously. And so now we need to set off and take up the challenge that's been laid out before us. So amazing work. I feel really honored to be able to speak on a panel with you. And I really do hope that I'll get a chance to see the exhibit in person myself. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Steve. Really appreciate your comments. So now we're going to go to Elena Zemkova. In 1987, Elena Zemkova became a co-founder of Memorial Historical Educational Human Rights Society. Since 1988, she has been working as a member of its board, and since 1995 as executive director of Memorial. She also supervises the Russian-German projects and coordinates the International Memorial Regional Network, which includes more than 50 regional organizations from Belarus, Germany, Italy, Kazakhstan, Latvia, Russia, and Ukraine. Her main academic interests include the history of political repression and a comparative analysis of the Nazi and Soviet repression mechanisms. Elena, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And since the subject of our meeting is women's memories of Gulag, our exhibit, and talking about and the talk about Memorial, and I would like our listeners, I would like to remind them that Memorial that emerged 33 years ago, so that's quite the age, and Memorial came up. It appeared as a response to a broad desire from people of having the truth about the past. We were on this really strong wave of this desire for the truth. And as much as we could, we structured this drive and turned into an organization that does human rights. And in 33 years, of course, there's quite a lot has been done. A huge database that is more than 3 million of names of victims of repressions, and there is a lot of books of quite a fundamental nature. There is a lot of masses of practical help to people looking for fates, looking for members of the family. There's a number of exhibitions, one of which that was in quite detail was presented to you now. And of course, on the one hand, there are these memorials, and of course the memories that we are trying to preserve. Also, it seems that there's quite a lot, but at the same time, if you look at what's happening around us and how much we should have done and how much we didn't manage, and how many people we did not preserve and things we didn't preserve. We didn't preserve the documents, we didn't get the access to the archives. And if we recall that even the minimal assessment here, that there's got to be at least 12 million names, and there's only 3.5 million of names we have in the database. And when we look at that, that is when you understand that how little we've done. And then the answer to what should be done and how we carry on and how we move forward, this will be just the most varied forms of involvement, engaging people in this common work. The return of the names you mentioned, this is one of the typical examples of engaging people into this joint effort. And of course, you are quite right, and through the quarantine measures and the pandemic, for the second year running, we haven't managed to get into the most important queue in the year. When you get to Lubyanka Square, there's many hours people are standing in this queue waiting for their turn to get one little piece of one biography of somebody who was executed, shot, and this is just 10-15 seconds, and for that people are standing there queuing in the cold and the snow, sometimes for hours and hours, 2, 3, 4 hours, and they don't leave because that queue is very important. That is the common deed. And of course, pandemic got in the way, and what we got this year online, in terms of online deeds, and that leaves you with a massive impression, because we address people, we talk to people, and we said that we want not just the return of the names, we want to return the names, the locations of memories, the places, the return of the places. And there was the direct broadcast, live broadcast, as was for 12 hours, no break. We haven't stopped for 1 second, for 12 hours live broadcast. And in this live broadcast marathon, we talked of more than 100 places of memories from most varied cities and towns of Russia and 10 countries of the world. And on this online broadcast, there was a team, more than 50 people were working in different countries of the world. And in these hours, we received more than 2,800 letters from people. There was 7 direct connections. There was reading the names from these points, from these locations, and that included Washington. From people from Washington, they were reading names out loud too. There was more than 400 video clips were played. There were reading names in various countries, and we understand. When you look at this joint effort, this common deed, you understand how important, how productive this working together is. And preempting the question that probably arises because those who have interest in memorial, they know that in Russia there are not the best times for the memorial at the moment. Everybody knows how much we've done and how responsible we are and how important this work is on the one hand. And on the other, us as memorial, we are in the register of the organization who are the foreign agents, organizations which are foreign agents. And of course, it doesn't matter. Russia, it is Russia, whether it is America or what. We all understand that. That is the connotations that as this is the register of spies. This is the register of kind of enemies of the states, and so it kind of creating this atmosphere of alienation, alienating people from our work, from what we do. And the people who participate in this, they have to be courageous and brave, and all of this gets in the way. That impedes our work. But preempting the question again, what's next? I have optimism. I'm looking with optimism. I'm looking ahead. So it's the same as in the beginning. 33 years ago, there was this broad wave of this drive, this interest to the memories, to restoration of fairness and truth. And now we feel a strong interest of people to restore the history of a family. People still want the truth about the past. And in this sense, I'm convinced, I'm totally sure that however they try limit the work of organizations like Memorial, still you cannot get in the way of people looking for the history of their family, and you cannot tell people, when you talk million of people, you cannot stop it, and one way or another, and I think it will be broad, and I think the return of the names, the way it happened this year, there was a huge support, a confirmation of my optimism.
Elena, thank you so much for your comments. I don't think too many of us expected an optimistic conclusion to your comments, but when you put it that way, it really does make sense. You can't stop millions of people who want the truth. And it brings me back to the perestroika time, which is when I came of age, when really the desire for truth was so much, and the information that was coming out was so cathartic. I mean, it was truly transformative. So what you all are doing is really very, very powerful and very much needed. So a reminder for our audience that if you have questions for our panelists, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom rather than raising your hand. And I'm going to take advantage of being the moderator here and ask some of the questions that I have. So first of all, Irina, I wanted to ask you, I think when we spoke earlier before this event, you mentioned that you chose to give the title material, right, material to this exhibit because it was sort of an interesting, it was an unusual way to bring people into the conversation about such a difficult and heavy topic such as the Gulag. What has been the reaction of people who are coming in? What do you think they expected to see? How do they react to what they actually saw? Tell us about that.
Thank you very much for the question. I do not know what they expected to see and whether we met their expectations, because there are people who know a bit about Gulag and understand a bit, and we were very pleased that there were people from the families which had given us some of those wonderful artifacts, and they brought their children, and sometimes they brought even their grandchildren, so that their children and grandchildren saw those artifacts, and we understand that, of course, this issue was in Procrustean bed in a way. We understand that our collection was gathered
все-таки
by
городские женщины
a
из
certain type of women. They were women from the cities, from educated sort of a class. They were women, wives of men who had been arrested for being in opposition to the Communist Party, for example. They had been members of other parties. And we also know about a different Gulag. Indirectly, we learn about the silent Gulag, the Gulag which left no memories. We learn about women who were of, if I may put it like that, illiterate culture or silent culture. And although our approach is very narrow, yet it demonstrated certain perspectives. And I'm very thankful to Stephen when he emphasized the importance of the material history and material culture. And when we used our approach to demonstrate these things, I hope that our visitors see that, for example, the Central Asian caps made by women in Gulag, this kind of a unisex thing, which used to be very popular in the Soviet Union back in 1930s and 1940s, and even I remember that when I was a child, I used to wear such caps, and they were made by different women. For example, an Armenian woman made it with some ethnic motifs, and in Karlak there were some Kazakh motifs embroidered by women, and they tried to tell us a story, not about a beautiful life. They tell us a story like when you have nothing, you have a terrible life, but you take literally pieces of thread and you juxtapose your thing of beauty to this terrible world around you. And women were very open about that, about the hygienic things and about the environment. It was terrible and it was humiliating. And we all remember life in the Soviet Union. It was pretty humiliating in communal flats as well. But in the camp, it was much worse. There were bed ticks and lice and rats and God knows what. But in those conditions, they created these things of beauty. And of course, it's so surprising. And we speak about women here, but we also have collections of artifacts created by men. And this would be unjust, unfair, not to mention that. Men also made things of beauty. There are lots of artists who created like small pictures and large pictures and different sketches. And there are some pretty famous artists who used to be incarcerated in Gulag. But usually it's different. Those artifacts are usually made of wood or metal, but there is this tactile closeness, if I may put it like this, concerning women. For example, the underwear produced in Gulag, the underwear produced by women as a present, and the very image of the fabric is very important. Or it reminds me of Penelope, who makes this cloth, or maybe it's also a myth when the Greek goddess puts the thread together, and we encountered it very often that we demonstrated such things. And 30 years ago, everything seemed to be very unusual. Everything seems to be unique. And right now, people are much more experienced, and people saw quite a bit of Gulag. And there is this museum of Gulag with very good exhibitions. But we wanted to ask people a question they wouldn't expect. We wanted to provoke their reaction, and Steve was quite right when he mentioned that. We wanted to demonstrate everything from an unexpected perspective. People now should try to understand how is it possible to make a dress out of basically nothing, make it out of bed sheets and make embroidery with a thread
Только с помощью
which was burnt, which was made black by burning in the fire. So they didn't have anything. They did that with just what they had.
так сказать,
How
творчество.
much creativity they needed for that. And of course, we didn't want to create a sentimental or an idyllic view of a camp. And of course, the memories we see here, we can hear here, emphasize that. And it was a terrible word, and the conditions were inhuman. All of our women mentioned that most of the women are who participated in our exhibition, for example, they gave birth to a stillborn child, or their child died immediately after the birth. So they had lots of tragedies in
И
their
страшное
lives.
так.
And of course, there were different women who maybe some of them were not at the highest moral standard. And for them, it was also impossible to draw a line between themselves and the world of hardened criminals. And it was very difficult to separate themselves from those hardened criminals. And there was a lot of violence as well. There were terrible things, and it's very difficult to speak of such things. We do try and describe such things, but it's like the black square. And I hope that our visitors will understand that. They will understand that women needed love. And for decades, they were isolated from normal human relations. But very often, these gender differences were completely destroyed, annihilated. And all the gender barriers and all those rituals were pushed away, and there was love and friendship between women as well. But how can we discuss that? How can we explain that so that we are understood in a proper way? Because it was also linked with the terrible criminal world where there were a lot of perversions, a lot of distortions, and very often women had to hide, conceal such things, and very often they just mention such things somehow in their poetry by hints, and it's terrible. It's difficult to find a story where, for example, women describe how they were raped, and we see only hints, only stories about these things happening to somebody else, but not to you personally. And how can we tell people such stories? Maybe some small minute thing can tell us a story. For example, this small icon can tell us some story. And we also failed to mention a very important aspect over here, this ethnic solidarity we should talk about. For example, during the war, there appeared very powerful groups united by a common ethnic fate, and that was Western Ukraine, the Baltic states, and very often we had ethnic motives over there, and this united these unions of women, which gave them strength, and it was based on an ethnic tradition, on a national tradition. For example, if women from Russia were very often united by a common cultural code, by poems or books, all of them had read. But with other ethnic groups, there is this, for example, song culture, and this culture of singing also preserved some religious things. For example, they celebrated Christmas despite everything, or celebrated Easter. And we tried to show these stories through fabric, through material. We do not know are we very successful in that or not, and you are the first
стоять наши
who
выставки.
asked us to tell us these stories, and for a year or maybe for 18 months, as long as our exhibition is working, we will be telling these stories, we will be discussing these things, and we will continue that.
I want to ask you, and I don't know if you have looked into it, or if there is even material about it, but listening to Irina's stories, about listening to her, to the stories that she shared with us, what occurred to me is I wonder, what was it like for women? Was it different for women who came after the Gulag, returned back to normal life? How was it for them to kind of merge back into regular life? Was it different than it was for men? Because we know, for example, that for women who served in World War II, their experience of coming back was very, very different from the experience of the men. Do you happen to know anything about that?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and I could listen to Irina talk about all of these stories. I think for hours. It's utterly amazing. Just to highlight what she was saying, about the creativity of using fish bones or matches to create needles to do this kind of work, and that's certainly what always struck me about the artwork of the Gulag and the way that prisoners would use bits of bark or pig's blood to create paints and things of this sort. But yeah, so for women, the experience of reintegration, I think, is actually another subject that academics need to spend more time thinking about. So there are important works like Nancy Adler's Gulag Survivor about the reintegration of former prisoners into life after the camps. But I think we really need to focus specifically on women's experiences and the way in which women's experiences in the Gulag are understood by those around them after they come back. I think, one interesting thing to see sort of in the culture in something like Vasily Aksionov's Generations of Winter or Moskovskaya Saga in the Russian. You have women as Gulag prisoners who come back and their family lives have been destroyed. Often, and the way it's put, and this is, of course, is a work of fiction, but from somebody who's had tremendous experience of his own mother's experiences in the Gulag and things of the sort. But you often see this sort of story of the woman who has supposedly lost her purity while she was in the camps and how that destroyed family life. Actually, in the series The Americans on American cable television, right? These embedded spies, in the United States. There's a story there of a woman who their family was torn apart because she went off to the camps, and while she was in the camps, she engaged in, what were seen by her husband as impure activities. And so I think there are real important questions about what women's experiences were like when they return, and whether, in fact, there was almost a presumption that a woman who survived must have done something in order to survive that would make her somehow, less pure, or that, she was somehow unfaithful to a husband who was left behind, or perhaps she had, some kind of improper relationship. I mean, I think it's these kinds of expectations that women might face when they return, questions that were asked of them that were not asked of men in the same kind of way. But yeah, so I mean, I think it's a really important, question to study. Now, a lot of the experiences, as I would say with the experiences of women as prisoners, the experience of being a prisoner is, in many cases, more important than the experience of being a prisoner who is a woman, right? So there are a lot of shared experiences among men and women, and I'd say the same for people who return, who are, they continue to be discriminated against because they had been in the camps. They're denied housing, they're denied jobs, they're looked upon suspiciously in Soviet society. All these kinds of things are going to apply to women as well. But I think it's a really important question, and this is, I think, what this exhibit does, and what Irina has done for us, is to just say, hey, look, there are so many questions that we haven't answered yet. It's really like Elena was saying, with knowing 3 million names out of 12 million, and what that tells us about how we have barely scratched the surface to understand this story and to understand this history. And I have to say, I've been reading about and writing about the Gulag for a quarter of a century now, hard to believe for me, and I have more questions today than I had when I started. And I think that it's just a continued important ongoing work for all of us. And we're just so lucky to have people in Russia like Irina, like Memorial, who are doing this kind of work.
Thank you so much, Steve. And Elena, I do have to ask you about the recent event that I think worried a lot of people, certainly in my circle, certainly people on social media, when a group broke into Memorial during the showing of the film Mr. Jones. I wonder if you can comment on that. Tell us, because I think that the information was never really clear what exactly happened. Who were those people? Did they act in collusion with the police? What was it about? I wonder if you can tell us about it.
Да, конечно. Ну, во-первых,
Yes, I can. First thing I should explain is that using this opportunity during a short break in the lockdown, we decided to resume our traditional demonstrations of documentary movies. That is our long-standing tradition at Memorial. We used to demonstrate lots of movies, and we usually have discussions around these movies, and documentaries in Russia are shown under very strict rules, and these rules become more and more restrictive. For example, right now you cannot show a documentary. You have to receive a special license first. You have to have permits from the Ministry of Culture, and there is a lot of red tape involved, and it also costs some money. But if you want to demonstrate a foreign movie once, it's somehow strange that you should receive a license for that movie separately. So you can do it together with some cultural center, for example, at some embassy. And there are lots of different cultural centers at different embassies in Moscow. But there appeared a new rule recently. The center at the embassy, which is our partner, should receive a permit from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. So in order to be able to demonstrate the documentary only once, this cultural center, for example, at the Polish embassy, should send an application to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation 2 months prior to the demonstration and receive such a permit. And we wanted to show this movie for a long time, and the author was ready and willing to demonstrate it, to have it demonstrated at Memorial. And we went through all the administrative regulations, went through all the red tape, and the Polish center this July wrote the letter to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, and we received all the permits, and we signed license agreements with the author of the movie. So we went through all the possible red tape, and it was the very demonstration of a movie after the lockdown, and there were few people because, well, there were about 25 people attending the movie, and there were representatives of the Polish Cultural Center and people from the embassies, and about 10 minutes after the beginning of the show, there appeared quite a large group of young people, mostly male. There was a young woman or two over there in that group, and I spoke to different people about their impressions, and many people told me that the very first association they had those stormtroopers of 1933 back in
А надо
Nazi
сказать,
Germany, because those people who
уже спокойно
broke into our room, and we had the video
40
recording, and later on we
в
counted
маленьком
that
зале,
there
где
was 41 persons in that group. You can imagine that there were 25 people watching the movie, and many of these people were pretty old, and they were diplomats, and all of a sudden there appeared 41 person, and they started
позор.
shouting at us, lie down, get on the floor, get out of Russia, and shame on you, you are a disgrace to Russia. So we called the police, and the police came, not very fast, but they did come. And in our opinion, they were not quite adequate to their task, because all the attackers basically were let go. But on the other hand, the workers of Memorial and all the viewers were locked in the room of Memorial for about 6 hours. So we had a feeling that we were not treated as victims of that attack. The hooligans broke into your house, and all of a sudden you are not a victim, you are a suspect. And of course it was very unpleasant, and I wouldn't want to waste your time with minute details, but I would like to draw some conclusions. I have mentioned it somewhere that all the laws, all the legal regulations connected with the work with other countries, all of them are aimed at creating an atmosphere of alienation, and of course they are conducive to such hooligans. So we saw an example of these hooligans who went unpunished, and of course we'll try to follow it up, we'll try to demand that there is an investigation and those hooligans are prosecuted, but it's very difficult to forecast the results. And at the same time, the very next day, we had an inspection at the memorial, an inspection out of the ordinary schedule, and the inspection was instigated by the police, and there was a complaint that given to the police, so that there are some commercial crimes being committed in Memorial. And now when somebody writes a complaint against you, the police is to investigate this, but the police is not to demonstrate this complaint to you. So you do not know who complained or what you are accused of, what economic, as they say, economic crime you are accused of. And we were accused apparently of selling tickets and getting some profit from that. Of course, it's very easy to prove that we did not sell any tickets, that this movie was absolutely free for everyone. Most likely, well, taking into the consideration that everything looks almost comic, but of course, we have to prepare a lot of documents responding to this complaint, responding to that police investigation. So we can assume that, of course, there is some hooliganism on the one hand, but on the other hand, we see that there are some forces, some people who feel that they won't be punished if they try to persecute us. And the same things, the same kind of thing happened in the Nazi Germany, when some hooligans felt that they would go unpunished for their hooliganism. And of course, on the other hand, there is this continuing pressure on the whole on our work. And this inspection is just one of the signs of this pressure. And in the end, I would like to say, as I've already said, I'm pretty optimistic about the future. I'm not saying that the future of Memorial is going to be optimistic, but the future of our work is definitely brilliant. I'm very optimistic about that because we speak about millions here, in the face of millions. You cannot stop it yet. You cannot ban it. And our position is very simple. Of course, we will stick to all the laws, even if we believe that those laws are not quite fair, and we will use every legal method to protest against such laws. And right now, the situation is very similar to the old dissident times when our Soviet dissidents used to say and used to appeal to the Soviet power that you, Soviets, should follow your own Soviet rules. And that's exactly what we're trying to tell the authorities. You should stick to your own rules and regulations and protect us from hooligans. And I'm very thankful to you for organizing this discussion. And I'm very thankful not only for the attention you paid to our work, but I'm very thankful that you mentioned the results of our work. And maybe this hooliganism is a kind of a response to our exhibition, but I'm sure the only thing we can juxtapose to this unpleasant, this inimical atmosphere within which we are placed is our work. Our everyday work is the only thing we can use against such things. And we can see that our work is useful to the people who come to our exhibition. There are quite a few visitors, and we see it in the performances we conduct, and we can see it in the questions people ask. And despite these attempts to create this atmosphere of alienation and hostility and silence around us, yet we have quite a few partners, and there are lots of people who are writing about us, and there are mass media writing about us, although it can lead to some unpleasant consequences for them. But I believe we are not going to have a real atmosphere of alienation around us, but we will continue our work. And I would like to use this opportunity to express our gratitude for the international support. And we know how our friends and partners take part in our work and give us aid and assistance. And from our perspective, it was very helpful, and it helped us out in this situation. So thanks again to all our friends.
Irina, I want to ask you, we have several questions from Oksana Kish, who was already mentioned, and I want to thank her for her questions and also for the information that he has supplied for us here in the chat. But since we're running out of time, I want to ask you one of the questions that she asked, and it's whether this exhibit will become virtual, whether people might be able to see it from overseas without having to travel to Moscow.
Well, of course, it's not that easy to transform it. The way it's actually made, the way it's built, to transform it into the virtual world is because, you know, this concrete world, it's so oppressing in this squashed space. But we are making a catalog, and it will be broader than the actual exhibit. It will have certain articles on the subject, women in Gulag. And of course, there will be certain virtual response and support. Beyond that, we will have that. Of course, it will not transmit this, this exhibition is not very mobile, but maybe something, we will do some mobile exhibit with some pieces or some stories. with these pieces. And of course, what we would like very much is that if there is an opportunity, and if there is this opportunity to show it in Ukraine, in Belarus, in Kazakhstan, where, thank God, is quite a lot done there. I need to stress that nobody thought in 1989 that in Kazakhstan, and that will be that's so right. That is so well connected to the fate of women there, and now we are torn apart here. The different pieces, now this memory, well, the Baltic state, of course, and we will attempt. We are trying to do these things, and before the events in Belarus, we did show it, and we hope that we will make an exhibit that will be done on fathers that were writing letters to their children. And of course, Elena was talking about it. We're trying to connect it up, this torn apart space, because the memory is united, this memory of terror, of violence, that what we've suffered through as big, large country, and there are no borders. And the Eastern Europe, of course, is a part of this memory, because Germans were in Gulag, and Hungarians and Czechs, and this is our common fate and our common memory, of course.
All of you, and I want to say that we have got so many thanks from participants of the webinar for what you're doing. We have somebody from Alger who has written to us from the museum Alger. So thank you so much. The recording of this conversation will be made available soon on the website of the Kennan Institute in English and in Russian. Lastly, I want to thank our translators, Dmitry Pobedash and Mikhail Krivenuk, for their superb work that made this bilingual event possible. Thank you to Memorial. We continue to watch your work with pride and incredible, just amazement at your courage and your sense of mission and purpose. And I'm sure we would love to have you back whenever you have time. Thank you very much.